will keep forgiving myself for what I chose to do to survive. I trust that I did the best I could with the knowledge and resources I had, and I do not take my survival for granted. These words are written in red ink on a green sticky note that sits on my desk between my monitors. I wrote it on a day last fall when I was struggling to understand who I am and struggling to reconcile the pain and joy that comes with learning what happened to you and that there are ways to move past that. It is a permission slip to myself to leave behind patterns, thoughts, and an entire identity that were formed in survival mode, and to trust that I can move forward in self-discovery without shame. It is a small reflection of a tender part of me that I've reconnected with by looking in the mirror. It can be a reminder for all of us that we can reconnect to our authentic selves through our own grace. In this talk, we're looking at identity as the way we conceptualize ourselves. It's those self-narratives that control how we love, what we fear, and how we react. But where does that identity come from? Science suggests that our identity comes from the thoughts and emotions we store from lived experiences that then impact our behavior and how we view ourselves. Our behavior and self-talk at large suggests that something is happening to our identities. The judgment we cast, the self-loathing we heap, and the fear we perpetuate are all signs that trauma has disconnected us from our unstoried selves. When we talk about trauma, we're talking about a disruption of safety. As Dr. Gabor Mate said, trauma is not what happened to you. Trauma is what happened inside of you as a result of what happened to you. So because trauma is what happens inside of you, when you're left with your overwhelming feelings, the body learns to interpret information in a way that makes you hypervigilant. This hypervigilance is the body's very attempt to restore safety, but it's often doing so in a way that restricts the mind and body's capacity to think and to feel. In survival mode, the body is skillfully putting up defenses against the unbearable pain that the ego has experienced. Those defenses often include disassociation and addiction. For those who endure developmental traumas, the way that we come to view the world and ourselves changes, so much so that sometimes we cannot recognize ourselves in the mirror. Developments in psychology, neuroscience, and pharmacology suggest that there are tools trauma survivors may use to rewire the brain for self-connection and self-awareness. I call the tools mirrors because each allows the individual to gaze into reality. We will start with glass mirrors. If we can lose ourselves so much in trauma responding mode that we don't recognize ourselves, maybe we need to linger longer in the mirror. Now, I'm not setting you up to suffer the same fate as narcissists. Quite the contrary. I want you to use the mirror as a tool to source love for yourself. Similar to how Mel Robbins has challenged you to high-five yourself in the mirror every morning, this mirror work involves gazing at the self. In that gaze, you're able to witness your own existence. Trauma often involves disassociation, where the mind and body separate. I've heard this described as your mind being off on a spaceship while the body's left behind. To me, at its worst, it was the feeling of not being alive. When we gaze at ourselves in the mirror, we are reminded that we are alive in a body on this planet, and that we can leverage this mirror work as a counter to traumatic disconnection. When we're able to watch ourselves breathe, touch our own skin, and hold our face as tears release, we allow the brain some space to understand that it can be connected to the self without being attached to the overwhelming feelings. When we meet our gaze with love and kindness instead of hatred, we allow more space for the mind to understand that it can exist beyond what it has known up to this point. And in this work, you are reminded that the body you see in the mirror is always working to protect you. The second mirror tool involves using other humans, namely practitioners, as mirrors. Our parents and caretakers are our first mirrors, and these things called mirror neurons play a critical role in our development. From birth, children rely on the language, the motions, and even the intentions of others as a source of reality. What they see mirrored back, accepted, projected, guided towards, that's where they'll develop. And the science suggests that the physical interactions we have with our caretakers will impact our sense of identity throughout the rest of our life. And Dr. van der Kolk's research shows that trauma almost always involves not being seen, not being mirrored, and not being taken into account. When a child's innate goodness is not mirrored back to them, they're likely to internalize messages of low self-worth and to desensitize from parts of themselves that were not received. Working with a trained practitioner is an opportunity to be safely mirrored. Now, I notice the mirrors coming in all sorts of ways, but mostly with language and body posture. So in a therapy session, a practitioner might start to use your own words and repeat them back to you, quite literally adopting your vocabulary. And when you start to hear this happening, there might be a realization of, oh, those thoughts, that language, it doesn't align with how I want to think and feel. In fact, it sounds a lot more like the shame, guilt, and fear from my childhood trauma or wherever I experienced trauma. And now all of that has manifested as anxiety in this body. A yoga practitioner might mirror your body shape to show you how to safely take up space and to move through sensation. Now, trauma survivors often remain in isolation because of the very real harm that they have experienced in the past. But if you're able to develop a trusting relationship with a non-judgmental practitioner who allows space for you to explore, working with one of these practitioners is an opportunity to learn that all parts of you are tolerable and to find ways to regulate yourself. The third mirror is actually a state. Here we're looking at how altered states can be mirrors. Maslow noticed that the more peak experiences an individual had, the closer they came to self-actualization. Other research suggests that awe-inducing moments, confusion, disruption, and altered states may be the fastest and most powerful tools for learning and personal growth. Now, we have this system in our brains called the default mode network. It's often labeled as the me network because it plays a critical role in the formation of our mental constructs. But early life trauma disrupts the formation and the continued functioning of that default mode network. As a result, many trauma survivors lack self-awareness, experience depersonalization, and have unhealthy attachments to unwanted character traits. By exploring altered states, there's this opportunity to loosen the grip that the neurotic mind has, the control that it has over us, to break up some rigidity in our thinking and our patterns. In that release, we can let go of shame-based thinking and start to see ourselves more clearly. Meditation is a non-ordinary state. It is a contrast to the constant doing and moving that consumes much of our daily lives. And the research suggests that meditation quiets the default mode network. So that's essentially us telling the ego to take a back seat and loosen the control that it has over us. You can meditate by yourself for 5 seconds or 5 hours or anything in between, with an app, with a friend, with your own breath, the YouTube video, inside, outside. The point is, when you feel that vibrancy in your body, that sense of overwhelm, that need for a break you have to create for yourself, you can just drop in. It's always available to you. You can also meditate with another person in a model where one is a sender and one is a receiver. Initially, that sender, without any verbal communication between the parties, is going to be witnessed by that receiver. So again, without any language, I might start to move my body and to express emotion and move through anything that's coming up. And that receiver is there to witness and to mirror my body shape and my emotions and expressions. And at some point, you're going to change, so each party gets to be a receiver and a sender. Psychedelics also offer access to non-ordinary states. When used with intention under particular settings with the help of healthcare professionals, the research suggests that psychedelic experiences enhance neuroplasticity in the brain. With trauma, our patterns become really rigid and that ego becomes overbearing. Psychedelics go in and disrupt that rigid patterning and quiet the default mode network in a similar way to that meditative process. Psilocybin, in particular, stimulates growth and repair in centers of the brain that are connected and needed for emotion and for memory. So when we can turn off that inner critic and feel our emotions safely, the openness that's created in that space can be a catalyst for building awareness and curiosity that leads us into sustained safety. The research suggests that there are 4 qualities of these altered states that are particularly helpful for those who've experienced trauma. It's the timelessness, the effortlessness, the selflessness, and the richness that can be experienced in these states. The neat thing about the research is it also suggests that when we leave the altered state and go back into the ordinary, that our brains, we as humans, can't just revert back to what we were or how we thought before. There's been some increment or measure of change within us. The 4th mirror is a look at our dreams. We've been exploring the meaning of dreams for thousands of years. Dreams are a connection to the subconscious, which takes up about 90% of the brain's processing power. It's where habits and conditioning come from. The author of the book, The Women Who Run with the Wolves, says, dreams are compensatory. They offer a mirror into the deep subconscious, most often reflecting what is lost and what is yet needed for correction and balance. Last Christmas morning, I woke up at nearly 4 a.m., drenched in sweat, plagued by the guilt and fear coming up in a nightmare. When I addressed it with a practitioner, I was reminded to create more space to try to tolerate the feelings. So without taking every message literally, maybe we can use our dreams as a tool to be curious about where we're hiding, holding, or avoiding in ways that are no longer supportive. The last mirror is a look at nature. Nature offers us a true reflection of our state and wants us to embrace that just the same. It reinforces this idea that we can change and remain beautiful, that we can be calm and feel the wind blow and the waves crash, that we are wild and serene, fierce yet tender. 2 things are true. Trauma often impacts our ability to have fun, to see and visualize things into the future, to play and to create. So activities and atmospheres that spark joy and allow for slow processing might help us reconnect. To use nature as a mirror, all you have to do is go outside in every season. Take your shoes off, walk on the earth, play in the sand, splash in the water, sing with the birds, and gather food to nourish your body. These 5 mirror tools can be used by trauma survivors to increase our capacity to feel. When we can tolerate internal emotional shifts, we're able to bring fragmented parts of ourselves back into wholeness. We need a whole experience in this life to live consciously, to reconnect mind and body. The mirrors offer us this opportunity to move out of our comfort zones, to dismantle our defenses, and to build some awareness of our conditioning while slowly softening the scar tissue. And when we can relate better to ourselves, in turn, we can be with and fully witness other humans in a more healthy way. But I won't sugarcoat it. Building this awareness and tiptoeing out of survival mode will take time. It may be confusing. The grief will hurt, and you will need support. When we work to unlock ourselves, we don't always know how to spot the treasure. We've spent so long looking for traps. So in this work, you might find patterns in language or in behavior that makes you cringe a little bit. In those moments, it will be really important to separate you as a human and your identity from that behavior. Trauma often leaves us feeling like we are bad, sad, or too much. But in healthy reflection, we can separate our identity from the feeling. The feeling is valid. We can be angry about what happened to us without becoming it. It has taken me years to understand that I am not angry or permanently unpleasant. I felt, and I sometimes still feel, a lot of anger about the physical and emotional abuse endured in my childhood home. I feel residual fear for the little girl who attempted suicide so many nights. I feel shame for the trespasses against my body that I've allowed to happen even as an adult. And I feel guilty for the behaviors that I've repeated for so long as I've tried to survive. But I am not anger, fear, shame, or guilt. They are not part of my identity. And they are not part of yours either. The mirrors offer us this opportunity to cut past the stories that cloud our ability to see ourselves. They offer a view into experiences and how we process that and all the emotions that came with it. When used with intention and safe support, the mirrors may offer trauma survivors an ability to see reality and to embrace our true identity. Thank you so much for listening.